We are ready. We are ready. Go for lunch. Okay.
Your phone.
It's on. It says it's on.
Okay. Ready? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Before we start, there's one announcement, which is that we have a lot of the book left to cover and we won't be able to finish today. And as you notice, even though there's been certain paragraphs maybe I've skipped and so on, and tried to go a bit fast, at the same time, I tried my best to make sure that I didn't rush anything in the sense that I didn't explain it clearly. So, because then there's no point. Like when rushing through the whole book and you don't understand anything, then we've just wasted our time. So what we've decided, inshallah, is that we'll just take what we can today, finish on time as well, inshallah, and whatever is left, then next week we will continue through Zoom, inshallah. So whatever is left, then maybe, I think maybe if you have about 3 days, 2 hours each day or something, maybe 3 hours each day, then we should be able to finish the book, because we have a lot of chapters, and a lot of these chapters are very important. We have khas, then we have mutlaq muqayyad, we have mujmal mubayyan, zahir mu'awwal, we have naskh abrogation. That's very important, because that's also something which you'll need a lot in Usul al-Tafsir. Then we have akhbar, which is a lot of it overlaps with mustalah al-hadith as well. So, especially I think many of you, because you attended the hadith dawrah, you want to study mustalah also. So because it overlaps, we can study parts of mustalah in here as well. Instead of doing a separate whole book, we can go through it in here. And then also talk about ijma'. Ijma' is very important. What is it? What are the conditions of ijma' and principles of ijma' and the different types of ijma' and so on. Likewise with qiyas, because qiyas, there's different types, there's pillars, conditions, and so on. And then also at-ta'arud, which is if proofs are seemingly contradictory to one another, what do we do? Which proofs do we give preference to, and so on? How do we combine between ahadith and ayat and so on? And then at the end, the mufti, mustafti, and issues regarding ijtihad and so on. So that's quite a lot of chapters that we've got, and I do want to go through them, inshallah, especially because in the English language, Usul al-Fiqh is not really taught. So if it was like a different book, maybe I would have said, okay, leave it. There'll probably be somebody else who will come and teach it and so on. But Usul al-Fiqh is rarely taught. To be honest, it's rarely taught to the general people in any language, to be honest. And it's normally only taught for those who are studying, as full-time students of knowledge and so on. It's in Islamic universities and so on. It's not really taught outside in many of the languages, apart from maybe the Arabic language. So inshallah, we will do that. And as for the exact details, they'll be announced, inshallah. They'll be sent into your groups and so on. And that's why if you don't have the number, then contact the brother, inshallah, and you'll be added. So now we are on the chapter al-khas. We have taken al-am, and now we are on the opposite, al-khas. And in this chapter, we will mainly talk about firstly the definition of khas, which is quite straightforward, and then we will talk about the different types of khas or khusus, and when does the ruling become specific and when does it not, and so on. So we start off with the definition of the Sheikh, where he says, linguistically, al-khas means the opposite of general, al-am. And technically, it means a word which is restricted to a person or a certain number, such as names of well-known people, demonstrative nouns, and numbers. Demonstrative nouns are basically called asma'ul ishara. So like this, that, those types of words. Meaning, the ruling is no longer general, but it has now become specified to a specific number or person or something like something similar. to that. Then the Sheikh, he says, then he basically is explaining this definition, and he says what is excluded from our word restricted is anything which is general. The word takhsis, making specific, linguistically means the exact opposite of generalization, and technically it means singling out some elements of what is general. Al-mukhassis with an I, that doesn't make sense in English. In Arabic, they say بكسر الصاد, meaning it's مخصص, not مخصص. So basically put kasra on the sad, on the first sad. مخصص. That's what it is referring to. So مخصص, not مخصص. And that's something that they do. You know, there's two ways of aiding a person in reading Arabic. The first is by adding the actual harakat. So you'd add a fatha, kasra, dhamma, and so on. The second, and this is more used back in the day, and this is better because it's more precise, which is where after mentioning a certain word, any hard letter, as for the letters which are known, they don't really talk about them, but any hard letters that people may make mistakes in, they specify after mentioning the words, then they'll say either in brackets or between hyphens or something, be fathi al-alif or kasri sad. You put a fatha on the kaf, on the alif, on the sad, and they'll mention it, and then they'll carry on with whatever they were talking about. So that's what he did here. So al-mukhassis is the one who makes the takhsis. Mukhassis is the one doing this action, which is the legislator, Allah. And the evidence that takhsis is obtained from is also called by this word mukhassis. So mukhassis is the thing which is doing this takhsis, the thing which is, or the one who is doing the action of specifying the ruling from its general ruling. And that, of course, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it can also be applied to the proof, the dalil. Because the ruling is general unless there is a dalil that makes it specific. So the dalil is doing that job. Okay? And maybe calling it a takhsis could come under, one of these. Maybe it can come under a sabab, that it is actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but what Allah has used as a means is the dalil. So maybe the calling it mukhassis, calling the dalil mukhassis. Why have you called it that? Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who does it, then maybe it's a form of majaz. So you can see how we're now connecting the previous chapter that we took to here. The evidences which indicate takhsis is of two types: connected and separate. And at the end of this chapter, I would recommend, I'm not going to do it. Okay, I want you guys to get used to doing these graphs and so on, but I would recommend that you try to draw like a tree diagram summarizing this chapter, because it's split into two: connected and separate. And then each of these are going to be mentioned quite a lot. So instead of having a lot of information, which is a lot of words and so on, you will just have, you can summarize it all into one word, inshallah, or one, page or tree diagram, inshallah. So then now the author, he starts talking about that which is connected. So, and these two Arabic words, connected is muttasil and separate is munfasil. Muttasil and munfasil. Because ittasala means to connect between two. That's why a phone call in Arabic is called ittisal, because you're connecting between two people. And munfasil, infasala, means to separate between two. Muttasil means to be joined or to connected. And as for munfasil, it means to be separate. So that's why is a classroom, or sometimes even in books, chapters can be called fusul or fasal, is because each classroom is separate from the next classroom. It's one thing where you're studying one thing and the next classroom doing something different. Likewise, sometimes chapters can be called fusul. I mean, there's a slight difference. Generally, the bab is like a main chapter, and then if you have like a sub chapter, that can be called a fasal. But for general understanding, fasal can also be used for to mean a chapter. And why? Because the next chapter is separate from the previous chapter. It's a new topic now. Okay, so that's why. And only the reason I mentioned the meaning of these two is because munfasil and muttasil are words that come across in other sciences as well. So it comes in tajweed as well, mad muttasil, mad munfasil, and so on. So if you know what the words, the linguistic meaning, it actually helps you understand the technical meaning. So even in tajweed, mad muttasil is when hamza is connected and in the same word after the harf mad, and munfasil is when it's separate, i.e. in the next word. Okay, so even tajweed, you can see that the meaning is used. I'm not going to go into that because that's tajweed, but the word muttasil and munfasil do come a lot. So al-muttasil, I connected. Therefore, from the mukhassis, al-muttasil, the connected specifier is, and now what the Sheikh is doing, he's going to mention a few different types of those mukhassis, those things that do the takhsis, that specify the general rulings which are considered from muttasil. Okay, muttasil meaning they are connected. And in total, there are three. The first is an exception, and the second is a condition, and a third is a sifa. And I'm using the Arabic word because within the sifa, a number of things are included. And this sifa has, the way the Sheikh has worded it, is a slightly different meaning to what sifa is in Arabic grammar. But, you know, there's overlap as well. But it's only slightly different. So now, the first one that the Sheikh is going to talk about is exception. An exception. So the first was exception, second was, what was the second? No, the first mukhassis, which is muttasil, is an exception. The second is, what did I say? No. See, that's why the drawing the graph is very important. Condition, good, condition. Shart. The first is istithna, which is exception. The second is shart, which is condition. And the third one is sifa, and I don't want to translate it because it includes a few different things. Sifa, if you do want to translate it, maybe description. Translate it as description. Okay. So these, if you look, actually no, you guys should do it yourself. The graph, I was going to show you how to do it, but you should do it yourself. So just to repeat again, what we have is mukhassis is two types, muttasil and munfasil. Now we're talking about muttasil, and there are three, which is istithna, which is exception, shart, condition, and sifa, which is we said description. Okay, first. And each of these within the, especially istithna, has quite a bit of rulings. So, you know, we have to make sure that we are paying attention. So the first is al-istithna. So the Sheikh, he says, al-istithna, exception, which linguistically is from the word thana or thani, which means to bend something with another part of itself, like tying a rope. And technically it means extracting some elements of the general word with the word illa, except, or with one of its sisters. Sisters meaning other words which have the similar function of the word illa, like ghayru, siwa, suwa, and others. So for example, we say la ilaha illallah. So la ilaha is is general. Illallah, except for Allah. So the ruling is now been specified due to illallah, due to illa. Illa means except Allah. So he gives another example. Innal insana lafi khusr. Verily man is in loss. Is this ayah general or is it specific? Innal insana lafi khusr. General. What's your proof? Alif al-lam, which has been added to al-insan. So all of mankind are in loss. So if you translate it to indeed man is in loss, or even if you translate it to indeed all of mankind is in loss, it's correct, because all of mankind is the meaning that we are taking. Okay, so that's, you know, that's why many of the ulama have said it's not permissible for a person to translate the Quran word for word. Okay, because as you can see, it needs more of like a explanation in English than a one-word translation. And then Allah says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except those who believe and do righteous deeds and advise one another with the truth and advise one another with patience. And what is excluded from our statement illa, except one of his sisters is making something specific with a condition or other than that. Conditions of istithna. Okay, so we've understood that one way we can make a general ruling specific is by mentioning an exception. So it's general, but in a specific scenario, due to the illa, it becomes khas. Okay, and this is muttasil, connected, because it's in the same sentence. It's connected. It's not a separate sentence. Innal insana fi khusr illa alladhina amanu. It's the next ayah, but it's straight away. Okay, straight away. So there's no gap, or it's not separate hadith or anything like that. But there are a number of conditions, and mainly there are two main conditions. Okay. Now there are two main conditions. The first, he says, conditions for al-istithna, for the validity of al-istithna, the following conditions are stipulated. Number one, it is connected to the thing it is being made an exception from, either actual connection or an assumed connection. So the actual connection is like haqiqatan, and assumed is hukman. What that basically means is that it is connected straight away. There's nothing splitting or differentiating between the general ruling and the specific ruling. So for example, it's not where I say something right now, general ruling, and then tomorrow I come and I say except. Okay, then there's a gap between them. Okay, they're separate now. It's where in the same sentence, or in the same breath, or in the same tone of speak, I give a general ruling, and then straight away I mention the exception. Whether it's in the same sentence or straight away in the next sentence. Okay, like the ayat from Surah Al-Asr. And when he says or assumed, that's hukman. I think a better translation might be, it takes the ruling of being connected. It's where, for example, I'm speaking, but then I sneeze, for example. I sneeze and I say, Alhamdulillah, I say, Alhamdulillah, and I say, Yahdikum Allah. And then a minute later, I carry on. Maybe I get tissue and so on. And now there's been a gap for a minute. Okay. And then if I carry on and I say, except for, and I carry on. Okay. Now, even though there's a gap here, it's still considered connected. Why? Because it's been, what is being separated by is something which you are not able to prevent. So if there's been some sort of gap from something which you are not able to prevent, then that's fine. And that still comes under something which is considered muttasil. So if the Prophet ﷺ spoke, something like that happened, there was something that took place where for a short period of time, Prophet ﷺ stopped and then carried on later, that is still considered muttasil, and it wouldn't fall into the other category of munfasil. Okay. And this is important. You might think that what we're talking about, but it's important. So, for example, upon the opinion that 3 talaq, is equal to 1 or is equal to 3, that's that's a separate fiqh issue. But even upon the opinion that somebody says that I've given you talaq 3 times, that's equal to 3. If we take that opinion, okay, if somebody was to say I give you 3 talaqs except for 1, then that's 2. But if somebody said I give you 3 talaq and then he stays quiet, then he thinks about it and says except for 1. Right? Is that 2 or is that 3? That's 3, because now there's a gap between it. So that's munfasil. That's not muttasil. So that's not really that would not come under istithna. That's not an exception. That's valid, because the condition has not been fulfilled. If he said it, I've given you 3 talaqs, and then he sneezes, for example, and then after that he says except for 1, that's fine, because something prevented him, which is something that he couldn't stop. Okay, so that's so you can see. I'll give a very simple example, but just for your understanding, you can see that it can have an effect upon the Islamic rulings like that. Okay. The second, okay, let's read what the Sheikh says actually. So the Sheikh, he says, actual connection, when the exception is directly next to the thing it is being excluded from, where there is no break in between them, while being connected in assumption, or I think better translation is taking the ruling of of being connected is when there is a break between them by something which cannot be repelled, such as coughing or sneezing. Okay. If, however, the separation between the two is by something which can be repelled or a silence, then the exception is not valid, such as my saying, my slaves are free. So somebody owns slaves, he said, my slaves are free, then a silent pause, or to speak some other words, and then says, except Sa'id, then the exception is not valid and all of the slaves are to be freed. Okay, so that is not a valid exception because the condition has not been fulfilled. It has been said that the exceptions are valid with silence or a break in speech if the speech is one. Okay, so sometimes, some ulama have said, and this is the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah as well, that if a person does remain silent for a very short period of time, it's not a long period of time, it's not like a 10-minute, hold silent and, that's quite long. Short period of time, and the topic's not being changed or anything like that, then it's permissible. Then that silence is okay. And they use a hadith for that, due to the hadith of Ibn Abbas that the Prophet ﷺ said on the day of the conquest of Mecca, this country has been made sacred by Allah on the day He created the heavens and the earth. Its thorns are not to be propped up, nor its shrubs uprooted. So Al-Abbas said, O Messenger of Allah, except Al-Idkhir, he said, except Idkhir. Basically saying that this hadith mentions that you can't cut the plants and trees and so on of Mecca. And then Al-Idkhir is a type of tree. So Ibn Abbas said, except Idkhir. And the Prophet said, except Idkhir. Now, the Prophet gave this exception. He said, Illa Al-Idkhir, except Idkhir. Is this a valid exception? Yes, because according to this opinion, is that it's the same speech. It's the same speech. Person who stayed silent for what, maybe 5 seconds, very short period of time. So that's why it's a very short silence, and the speech is one. Then ulama such as Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, they permit this and they say it's considered a correct form of exception. This view is the most likely, most correct, due to the apparent meaning of the hadith. So due to this hadith, that's why it is correct. Number two, what's this number 2 for? The second condition, good. The second condition for what? Second condition for istisna to be correct. So it's not number 2 for shart, which is, from the mukhassisin, which mukhassisat which are muttasil, istisna, shart, and sifa. It's not that. It's not number 2 shart for that. It's underneath istisna. The 2 conditions. The first is the one that you mentioned, and the second is Allah yakun al-mustasna kull al-mustasna min aw akthar min nisf al-mustasna min. The exception should not be more than half of the thing it is excluded from. Meaning, if I say, if I give a ruling to everything, for example, let's read this example of the Sheikh. So if it is said, I owe him 10 dirhams except 6, that's not allowed. You can say, I owe him 10 except 1. Okay? This is one way how Arabs used to speak. So instead of saying 9, they would say 10 except 1. Okay? And that's fine. But if it becomes 10 except 6, that's more than half, then that's not accepted form of exception. That's not an accepted form of exception. So Sheikh, he says, so if it is said, I owe him 10 dirhams except 6, then this is not valid exception and the whole 10 is payable. Okay, because it's invalid. It has been said that this should not be a condition and exception stands even if the exception is more than half, that he is not obliged to pay more than 4 dirhams. Okay. Qeel, when it says qeel, it is said, that's the Sheikh just indicating towards a second opinion. So there is an opinion that mentions that it's fine. However, normally when the ulama say qeel, it is said, and then they don't say which is a stronger opinion, then most of the time it shows that what they mentioned first, that's a stronger opinion. So it's saying that this is the opinion, and some say this. Okay, so what you understand from that is that the first one that he mentions is a stronger opinion, and then just for information that there are some ulama that mentioned other than that. That's not two separate conditions. حقيقة and hukman is, if you go back to the first condition, which is for istithna, sorry, for connected. Condition for istithna, number one, it is connected to the thing. It is being made an exception for either an actual connection or assumed. So the first condition from the first, yeah. So it has to be connected, either actual connection by a continuous speech, or it takes the ruling, the hukm, the ruling of being connected, which is if it is interrupted by something you cannot stop, such as sneezing. That's haqiqatan and hukman. Hukman. The second condition is the exception should not be more than half. Allah yakun is a kind of sentence. Allah yakun. The first is also a sentence as well, but it's fine if you want it. Allah yakun al-mustathna akthara min nisf المستثنى منه المستثنى منه. Okay, then the Sheikh says on the next page, as for making the entire sum an exception, then according to both positions, it is not valid. She's just saying, I owe him 10 except 10, then the whole 10 is payable. If somebody does that, then everyone agrees that that's not valid, because then he's just playing around. Yeah? 10 except 10. Yeah. Yeah. This stipulation is on whether the exception is to do with numbers. But if it's to do with a description, then it is valid even if most or all is made an exception. Basically, this is talking about that what we just talked about is if the exception is to do with numbers. If it is to do with like characteristics and descriptions, except for the one like this, and it becomes like a description instead, then that's fine. Okay, because it's not to do with numbers. Let's take an example for it to make more sense. An example of that statement is a statement of the Most High. Most High meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Most High is repeated a lot. In English, we don't really say the Most High, we say the statement of Allah. Okay, but they say that this is qawluhu ta'ala, meaning the statement of Allah, the Most High basically. To Iblis, inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan illa man ittaba'aka min al-ghabin. Indeed, my servants have no authority will you have over them except those who follow you of the deviators. Okay, as for those who are sincere and upon tawheed and so on, then they will, Allah, shaitan will have no power over them. And the followers of Satan compared to the children of Adam are more than half. And if you say give to everyone in this house except the wealthy, then it transpires that all those in the house are rich. The exception will still hold true, and no one in the house receives anything. Second, from the mukhassas al-muttasil is the shart condition, which in the Arabic language means a mark or sign, and what is meant here is connecting one thing to another, whether it is present or not, with the conditional an or one of its sisters. I think it's an with the hamza. 1 second. Or be in. No wonder, yeah, be in. It's not an, it's in. The word is in. In Arabic means if. In fa'alta kaza, if you did this, then this will happen. So that's a mistake. It's not an, it's in. The condition is specific, whether it comes early in the text or late. Okay, so if you say, if a sentence is conditional, that condition can come in the beginning of the sentence or it can come at the end. That's not an issue. An example of when it comes early is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concerning the idolaters. فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ فَخَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. But if they should repent, establish the prayer and give zakah, let them go in their way. Indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. So the condition came in the beginning. If they, okay. An example of when it is delayed in a text is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَالَّذِينَ يَبْتَغُونَ الْكِتَابَ مِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ فَكَاتِبُوهُمْ إِنْ عَلِمْتُمْ فِيهِمْ خَيْرًا. And those who seek a contract for eventual emancipation, this is referring to slaves. They're known as mukatab. And that a mukatab is where a slave, he has an agreement with his master that if he pays a certain amount of money, then he is freed. That's what it means, okay? So from amongst you whom your right hand possesses, then make a contract with them if you know there is within them goodness. Okay, so you can see this condition came where in the beginning of the sentence or at the end? At the end, in alimtum fihim khayra, if you know or if you know there is within them goodness. Third what? Sifa, yeah. So the third type of what? Mukhassas, which is muttasil. Very good. A description. So a description of sifa is a few different types. The first is a description such as specifying some individuals from a general group by way of adjective, substitute, or state. Adjective is na'at, substitute is badal, and state is hal. And the Sheikh will give an example of each one, inshallah. So in terms of the first, an-na'at, he says, an example of the adjective is the saying of Allah Most High, فَمِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ مِنْ فَتَيَاتِكُمْ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. So from those whom your right hand possesses of believing slave girls. So slave girls is general, okay, or slave girls. But now it has been specified with an adjective which is believing slave girls, meaning this ruling is not regarding any slave. If she's a disbeliever, it's not accepted, it's not applied to her. It's not been specified to the believing slave girls. The example of substitute is a saying of the Most High, وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. And due to Allah, it's obligatory from the rights of Allah. From the people is a pilgrimage to the house for whoever is able to find a way. No. Now this is badal, it won't make sense in English. This if I try to explain it, you're gonna really fully understand it, and it requires a whole, quite a bit of an explanation. So I'm not really going to mention it too much. But basically, I'll explain it simply. If you understand it, you understand it. If you don't, then khair. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. That's called a badal from the people. So it's kind of specified what type of people it is referring to. Okay, so it's as though Allah has said that it is obligatory upon whoever can find a way to make pilgrimage to the house. So badal in simple terms is a substitute, meaning if you were to put that substitute that has come in place of the other word, it would make sense. So this is now a substitute for the word people, because an-nas is general, but Hajj obligatory upon all the people? No, it's only obligatory upon those who are able to do so. So if you were to split, if you were to, let's say this ayah, and due to Allah, from the people, obligatory, from the rights of Allah, it's obligatory upon the people. Let's change the people, it's obligatory upon those who are able to find their way, pilgrimage to Hajj. That's what badal is. That's those who are able to do, those who find a way, those who are able to. But what I'm trying to explain what badal is, that in the badal is in the sentence, that what's considered a badal, if you were to place that as a substitute for the other word, it would make sense. Okay, so walillahi ala nas, so it's upon, an-nas means people. So instead of saying it's obligatory upon the people to do Hajj, for those who are able to do, another way that to make the sentence make sense, it is obligatory upon those who are able to do so to do Hajj. That's what it basically means. Okay. And then the Sheikh, he says, an example of hal is a state, is a saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hal is the state of the state of a person or the people. ومن يقتل مؤمنا متعمدا فجزاؤه جهنم خالدا فيها وغضب الله عليه ولعنه وأعد له عذابا عظيما. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, whoever kills a believer intentionally is, and until the end of the ayah. So this ruling that he'll be punished and so on, this is only applicable to a believer who does it intentionally. So the state of that person is that he has to do it intentionally. If he does it by accident, then this ruling will not be applied. Obviously, if a person kills somebody by accident, there's still other rulings that take place, but we're talking about the ruling of his recompense is hell, where he will abide eternally, and so on. That is for the person who is in the state of doing it intentionally. Now we move on to the second type of mukhassasat. The second type, which is mukhassis al-munfasil. Na'am. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Sheikh rahimahullah, he says the separate mukhassis is that which is independent and it comprises of three things: sense, religion, and legislation. Meaning there are three types. There are three types of mukhassis, which is munfasil. It is sense, reason, and legislation, which is sense is al-hiss, reason is al-aql, and legislation is al-shara'. Shara', sheen ra'in. Meaning, if we have an ayah which is general, and we want to specify it, which is munfasil, basically means that it's one of three types. Okay, munfasil meaning is separate from the ayah. It's one of three types. The first is al-hiss, meaning your senses, right? And the Sheikh gives an example, and in the example you understand. An example of takhsis by the senses is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding the wind of Ad. So when the people of Ad were destroyed, it's by a wind. The wind, تُدَمِّرُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ بِأَمْرِ رَبِّهَا. It destroyed everything by the command of its Lord. The sense indicates that it did not destroy the heavens and the earth. So even though Allah said, even though it's general, okay, firstly, is this ayah general? Yes. What's your proof that this ayah is general? Kul, very good, the word kul. So everything was destroyed. So that would mean that every single thing was destroyed. But from hiss, you understand that, okay, was the earth destroyed? Earth was destroyed. Were the heavens destroyed? No. So we, from hiss, from our senses, we work out that the people and that village that they were, that's what was destroyed. And this, subhanallah, was something that happened with Imam Ahmad, where Imam Ahmad had a trial where the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah, the Jahmiyyah came to him and said that say that the Quran is created. And one of the proofs that they tried to use, they said, is the Quran shay? Is it considered a thing? They said, yes, the Quran is a thing. Doesn't Allah say, Inna khalaqana kulla shay'in, Inna kulla shay'in khalaqanahu biqadar. The very we have created everything. So Imam Ahmad said, okay, likewise, doesn't Allah say that the wind tudammiru kulla shay? They said, yes, Allah says that. But was everything destroyed? Was the heavens and the earth destroyed? They said, no. Well, likewise, in this ayah, because the Quran is the speech of Allah, a characteristic of Allah that can't be created. So from our hiss, we know that that is not included in this ayah. And that, ended that argument of theirs. And that, subhanAllah, shows how the Salaf were with the Quran. If somebody said that to us, we'd be like, actually, yeah, what do we say? But you see, Imam Ahmad, he was strong when it came to the Quran, so he was able to refute that claim. Okay, an example of takhsis through reason, through the aql, is a saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, Allah khaliqu kulli shay. Allah created everything, or Allah is the creator of all things. The man indicates that Allah is not created. When you say Allah is created, or is the creator of everything, of all things, then, through our aql, we know that Allah hasn't created himself. That doesn't make sense. They say, they give an example, can a mother give birth to herself? doesn't make sense. So likewise here, we know that when you say Allah created everything, or Allah is the creator of everything, then that doesn't include Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Some of the scholars hold the view that what is made specific by the senses and intellect is not from the general that is made specific, rather it is from the general which is intended for specific. So the intent of the speaker or the addresser is not the specific in the first place, and this is a general reality which is a specific one, as in the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High is intended by. This is another issue which is al-aam alladhi urida bihi al-khusus, where when the legislator is speaking, he actually uses a word which is general, but what is intended is something which is specific. Okay, and this is another issue. So we only have 10 minutes left, so for that reason, I'm not going to go into that. We'll leave that for now, inshallah. Don't worry, it's not the most important, so it's okay, inshallah. And then he carries on to say, as for the takhsis of legislation, so we move on to the third one, which is legislation. What are the different ways that you can do takhsis through legislation? And this is probably the main one that we want to focus on. And this is done by a number of ways, by legislation. So you can number them if you want as we go along. As for takhsis of legislation, then the book and the sunnah is made specific by each other, as well as ijma' and analogy. So basically, I'll number them separately in a bit more detail so you understand a lot more. So the first way is the Quran, a ruling in the Quran being made specific by another ayah in the Quran. Okay, so the Quran with the Quran. So what's specified this ayah in the Quran is another ayah in the Quran. That's the first. The second way is that an ayah in the Quran has been made, which is general, made specific by the Sunnah. By the Sunnah. Okay. So, for example, when Allah talks about all those ayat regarding inheritance, that the son gets this much and this person gets this much, then in a hadith, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said that you do not inherit from a kafir, for example. So the ayah was general, includes every single person. But now what specified it? This hadith specified it to only the believers. Okay. The third is specifying an ayah in the Quran by ijma', by consensus of the scholars. Now ijma' is a separate topic which we will take shortly in the next few chapters, inshallah. Okay. And then the sixth way is an ayah which is general with qiyas. By qiyas. So qiyas is an analogy. So an example of this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those who commit zina, they will get lashed 100 times. Okay. And in one ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as for the female slaves, if they were to commit zina, فَعَلَيْهِنَّ النِّصُّ مَا عَلَى الْمُحْصَنَاتِ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ. They get half the punishment. Meaning they would get how much? 50. Okay. This ayah, فَعَلَيْهِنَّ, is referring to the female slaves. Okay, what about the male slaves? What about the male slaves? No. So they do qiyas upon the female slaves because they're both slaves. Okay, so they are both slaves. So even though the general wording of the ayah initially where I mentioned 100 includes male slaves and includes female slaves, the female slaves have been specified by another ayah. So that would come under the first category. But as for the male slaves, the ulama use qiyas on the female slaves because they're both slaves. Then why has the female slave, has her punishment been made half? Because of the fact that she is a slave. Okay, so the same reasoning can be found in a male slave. It's not the gender. It's because of that. The reason is because they were a slave. So the ulama say likewise, it's applied to the male slave. So the male slave will get half as well. So why has this general ayah been specified for the male slave? Due to qiyas. Due to qiyas upon the other ayah.
Ijma will supersede qiyas.
Sorry?
Ijma will come before qiyas.
Ijma is stronger than qiyas. Yes. Ijma is stronger than qiyas. But there's no contradiction in this with the. If there's contradiction, then obviously you give reference to qiyas. And this is what we're going to talk about later. One chapter, at-tartib bayn al-adillah, the ordering of the adillah, which is the strongest, and so on. Okay. Okay. This is regarding ayat from the Quran. How do you specify ayat from the Quran? And then we have the exact same, but from the Sunnah. So the next one is Sunnah by Quran, and a Sunnah by another hadith, or by Sunnah, and a Sunnah by Ijma', and a Sunnah by Qiyas. And there are many examples, and the Sheikh mentions many of them here in this chapter. But what we'll do, inshallah, is, all the Sheikh does is mention examples now. He doesn't really mention any other issues. So what we'll do is that you can read the examples yourself, inshallah. And with that, we've finished this chapter of Khas. And the next chapter is Mutlaq. And what we'll do, we'll stop here, inshallah, in the chapter of Mutlaq. And like I mentioned, bi'idhnillah, we will continue. Maybe, I'm traveling tomorrow, so maybe not tomorrow or the day after, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, around about there. We'll start, and inshallah, depending on how long the lessons are, 2-3 days, inshallah, we can finish the whole book. I won't make it as long. So we started at 4, finished at 9:30. I won't make it 5 hours long. Maybe we'll do that 2-3 hours, and inshallah, 2-3 days we can finish the rest of the book, inshallah. And like I mentioned, the information and announcements regarding that, they'll be sent. So if you haven't taken the details, then contact the brother, inshallah, and the details will be given to you so that you are notified regarding any updates. And with that, alhamdulillah, we've come to the conclusion of this dawrat. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it a means of benefit, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it from us. Subhanak Allahumma hamdika, la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.